Okay, guys, we're live. Thank you so much. Welcome to Environmental Social Justice. And today's guest, we have Jonathan Parfrey. He is the founder and executive director of Climate Resolve. And so people who don't necessarily know what Climate Resolve is, it's a 501c3 nonprofit. And they focus on connecting communities, organizations, policymakers to recognize and address global problems with local action. So keeping everything, our climate change issues, heat, fire, storm surges, everything but local action. So welcome also to Miss Joy Langford. She is our—
Hey, good morning, everybody.
We're both wearing red. This was not planned, just kind of happened. But first, before we jump into a whole bunch of questions I have, special shout out to you, Jonathan, for giving me my first gig as the insurance climate person. We met about a year ago, and you said that I was the first person to be able to translate climate change to insurance people and insurance to climate people. So that was probably the greatest compliment I ever had in my life. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. But one of the things I want to talk about primarily was the paper that Climate Resolve recently published called Lessons Learned from the Woolsey Fire. And that was a paper you guys released. And one of the takeaways I had that really bothered me from a social justice aspect was employees at these estates in Malibu were required to stay behind and fight the fires. So if you want to add on to that or any perspective you have from that.
Sure. We absolutely. We interviewed the folks who run the Day Labor Center out in Malibu. And so you have to imagine that a lot of these people are very low income. They're out in urban parts of LA, and they drive their cars out to Malibu to try to get hired to do a few hours of often minimum wage work because of their immigration status, and so they're living in their cars, or they're people who can't get jobs by other means, and then it's these very individuals who get hired by these very wealthy people out in Malibu, and they're probably wearing tennis shoes, maybe they're wearing boots, I don't know. But then they were asked to go out without the proper equipment, and they were hired to protect the homes of the very wealthy. And I have a problem with that. I also have a problem with a lot of the service workers were simply not informed to get the hell out of there. I don't know if people really recognize that Malibu has a lot of ranches, and people have horses. They have other exotic animals. I encourage people to go and Google, llamas on Zuma Beach, because these workers literally had to walk the horses and the dogs and the llamas and whatever animals that were there so that they wouldn't burn, they wouldn't die in the Woolsey fire, literally walk them down to Zuma Beach to safety. And there are photographs of this. There's photographic evidence. And so when fires happen, people, I think, unfortunately, just naturally go to the loss of the home. And that's what they focus in on. But what they don't recognize is that a lot of people are impacted by these fires that are dependent on the work of working in these homes as a housekeeper, as an au pair, as a gardener, as a landscape person, as a ranch hand. And to my knowledge, the Malibu Foundation, by the way, has done a great job of trying to help service workers and funding them in a recovery position, but they simply don't have enough money to do the job thoroughly. And I just find that we just, in these fire situations, there's just this forgotten, neglected community of poor people who either get enlisted to do dangerous things, or people who are just forgotten about in the recovery scenarios.
Have there been any now that this is kind of out there and people are aware of this, do you see any changes happening, or are we just not there yet, or are people maybe turning a blind eye to it and hopefully it'll go away? Unfortunately, that does happen more often than not.
I think our organization is fundamentally committed to racial justice and social equity. It's in our DNA. It's part of my background, who I am as a director. It's reflected in our board of directors and who we hire and the programs that we undertake. And when we first were asked by the Hilton Foundation to examine the effects of the Woolsey fire, we were thinking, well, this one is like the one program where we're not necessarily going to be examining in an urban environment what climate change does to people. We're going to look at it in this wealthier community, and lo and behold, what do we discover? It's the low-income people who are being the most impacted in this wealthy community.
Yeah,
so our organization is going to continue to do this work.
Well, the legislature last year, Assemblywoman Burke, who I work for, and Ricardo Lara, the insurance commissioner, put together a bill, a very similar bill regarding fires in Los Angeles, making sure that the workers are taken care of as far as pay and wage. Let's say a fire broke out, an employer can't just send them home with no monies and tell them, don't come back until we call you. So there is legislation that's being brought to the forefront on issues like this to make sure that laborers and day laborers are not just left out in the cold due to natural disasters. And so apparently it's moving up and down the state.
So is that bill going to be reintroduced this session?
I think that it is going to be reintroduced this session with some tweaks as it relates to COVID.
Let me know about it, because we'll go to bat for it. I think it's really important.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, how quickly can this get implemented? Is there a time? Because I'm not really involved heavily in politics or policy making. So how quickly does it take for something like that to be implemented and actually enacted upon?
8 to 11 months, depending on when it was planned for. And it goes up to vote. Everything's got to go up to vote around the November time frame. And then, then it's, appropriated, money's put toward it. And then that's kind of how the process runs. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. But it's a thing, right? Whether you're, in Ventura, mining, strawberries or onions or what have you, there's very few protections for the migrant population. And then accordingly, it creates environmental and social justice issues for a very, very vulnerable population that trickles down into everything, our school districts, living situations for people. It's a real thing.
When we were looking at the Woolsey fire, we were introduced to a group out in Ventura County called 805 and DocuFund. What an amazing group. And one of the things that they discovered is that a lot of these workers, they're getting paid by the day, by the hour. And so when it's a very the air quality is just terrible because of smoke, and it's in the Oxnard Plain, people are still going out there and working because that's how they get by. That's how they get their money. And so there is no prohibition to stop growers from having people working on these days when being outdoors is really bad for your health. There is a law that was recently enacted through the work of the United Farm Workers to provide protections to agricultural workers by providing different shade structures and water and long breaks during extremely hot days for those agricultural workers. We think that's a really good idea because, again, it gives people the opportunity to go out and earn some money, but at the same time, we want to make sure the growers are actually providing those services and that there's some
healthy work environment.
And Cal OSHA, I think Joy knows, there's it's just a handful of people to do enforcement in the entire state. We probably shouldn't broadcast that fact because, businesses can just ignore a lot of those safety provisions, which is, we should just have a little bit more teeth out there so that the employers would do the right thing.
And it should also be,
just insert COVID into the same scenario. People have to go to work and they feel they need to go to work with maybe COVID symptoms. Got big problems down at the Farmer John plant and down in Vernon and growing. People are just really out here, taking it day by day, and other people's lives are in jeopardy, not just that one person's. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it should also be, highlighted for people listening in. The work, people are not going home to an environment that is also clean. Most of these people, when they go home, they live in an inner city where the air pollution is still there. So they're going from one bad air pollution area to another bad air pollution area without a reprieve between the two. So it should actually be acknowledged that, it's not like you can go home and breathe clean air. You're kind of a constant cycle of bad air quality. But to go on, I wanted to jump topics just to go back to what Climate Resolve is focusing on. You guys are working, local action for global problems. So we have an issue, higher temperatures, more wildfires, more severe wildfires, flooding, storm surges, sea level rising. What can we do in Southern California or perhaps worldwide, scale it up, to adapt to this? And more importantly, how do we pay for this? Because the second money gets involved, people say, I can't do it. So we have to overcome that hurdle.
Well, Wendy, in your litany of biblical afflictions facing California, you left out drought, flood, and ocean acidification. So you have to update your
Sorry, I'll add everything in.
the plagues of Egypt, that we're experiencing.
Locusts.
Locusts, we'll see. I mean, there is, with extreme heat, you are getting different pests that spread disease entering into California, like the mosquito that actually brings malaria. The Aedes aegypti mosquito is now in California. Now, I'm not saying that they're bringing malaria, but you have the foundation for malaria and other diseases to now come into the state, thanks to climate change. Thank you, climate change.
Yay.
So I think you're asking the best question that can be asked about it. And frankly, what we need are people to substantiate and economists to jump into this conversation to substantiate, well, what if we do nothing? Like, what if we just let things proceed and we're still going to have these emissions and we don't take any steps towards adaptation? What is the cost to Californians? Let's really determine what the baseline is. Because it's a really important question, because the way that economists keep phrasing it is that, well, we can't afford these climate adaptation measures. We can't afford these climate mitigation measures. And the question back to them is, can we afford not to? And it's a changing denominator. And that's the most important concept here, is that things aren't just stable, and this money for climate change is an additive thing that's going to hurt the economy. No, don't look at it that way. Instead, you have to see that the climate is impacting us. It's exacting a cost now. How can we reduce the economic burdens placed on us by climate change? So that's the first step. And the second one is well, where do we get the money from? We're experimenting right now with some interesting ideas where you're getting money not from government, but from the private sector out of self-interest to put it into play. So there is a way that we tax ourselves. Now, we can do that through a tax, through a county tax or a state tax. It could be done, but it's unpopular. People don't like sending their money to the government related to this work. So what if there were a district where people know that they're in the WUI, the wildland urban interface, where there's a lot of fire, and they add on a little tax in this area to say, we're going to remove the brush from around this area on those public lands. We're going to install extra fire hydrants in our area. We're going to have like fire suppressant materials like Fosdec or some other brand that is available super cheap because we bought a bunch of it, and the district is distributing this. In that way, people are saying, we're going to protect our area to make sure that it doesn't burn. Or the county or the district, whatever it is, could buy filters to keep embers from going into those homes. So that's on a wildfire district, but we can apply the same idea for an inner city area that gets extremely hot. So like in city of Los Angeles, El Sereno has terrible tree canopy. There hardly is any. It's the only part of the city of LA that's in the San Gabriel Valley. It gets really hot there. And they also are so a terrible tree canopy. People there could pool their resources, tax themselves just a little bit, and lock in that property tax over 30 years through something called Mello-Roos. And then there's funding to do things like planting trees, maintaining trees, having reflective streets, reflective rooftop materials, having bus shelters that have shade, having really good water fountains that get maintained that people can use. So you can implement these community-wide benefits where the people in that community pay for it. If you can't get a state bond on climate resilience, you can't get a county bond on climate resilience, you shouldn't give up hope. We should keep trying to do those things. Yeah. But absent those things, we shouldn't just throw up our hands and say there's nothing we can do.
I like the fact of private funding. Most people are going to be very adverse to new taxes, regardless of the benefit that it brings to them. People are just going to be holding off on that. One of the things, I mean, we do see a lot of private entities that are now getting involved in it. Economists, thank God, are now getting involved in climate change, because before their involvement, we were just a bunch of silly little tree huggers. So now people realize this is a real thing. This is science that is supporting this. I just wish that most of the economists actually had an environmental background, because many of them will say, oh, we'll fix this one little thing and the world is better. And it's like, there's a lot that needs to be addressed. It's not just one thing. So when people that are listening in, when we talk about how will climate change affect your business, shipping ports will change, shipping routes will change, our airstreams and jet streams are changing. We're getting too hot where workers cannot be outside to work. The air quality is bad. Fires are destroying everything. So this is all connected. And again, I mean, the big issue is payment. Who do we get? I love the idea of Mello-Roos, lock in that property rate, but then some people who have had bad experiences with Mello-Roos, because the first time I heard about it ever in my life was when someone was complaining about it. So it's about that positive encouragement to kind of suppress any of the negative that might go along with that. And that's going to be the big challenge for just the average citizen to kind of get into their head that this is something beneficial for everybody as a society, not just one person over another. This is everybody involved. And
also, if you don't do it, how does that affect your property values? If you don't make these investments, what happens to your quality of life? What happens actually to your future? Do you have much of a future without making these investments up front? And that's a really important concept. And sometimes when there's important concepts, I actually turn to the nonprofit sector, my sector, and I have a little bit of a wagging finger with them. We keep wanting government to do the right thing, but we haven't laid the foundation to help government make these decisions. It's like, we want government to do all these things, but there's no public support for it. So it's our job.
It's your job.
As people who try to influence others to do effective communication. And I have to say, with a lot of nonprofits, not effective communication. We're not speaking to people where they are. We're not speaking in a language that they understand. We get very wonky on them. What we have to express is what's happening in the world related to climate change in a way that it connects to their lives and in a way that gives them hope. Like, if you take these steps, things actually might get better. That's why we focus so much on tangible things that could actually work. Then people will experience those tangible effects and go, this is a great idea. Let's do more of this. We trust those guys.
Yes.
They lead us astray, you know?
The baby steps leading to the big win. That's what we need to focus on. So, Joy, did you have anything from your policy side, since you are our government liaison and you actually know this stuff that I do not know about? What can we, anything with policy being started other than what we just talked about, or any developments you're seeing where people are proving this?
Yeah, I would really just hope that, we can introduce the bill that we were working on with Ricardo Lara's office. But besides that, things right now are kind of just stagnant with the whole, COVID thing. There are some bills being brought in regarding CAL FIRE and some of the help that we'll be able to give them, especially due to the COVID situation. Another thing to watch out for are like these new private firefighting firms that are protecting like various big homes and mega mansions, like for the Kardashians who have their own personal fire department. I don't see any equity in that piece, besides the fact that they might be able to start some anti-recidivism efforts by hiring on, firefighters that were previously incarcerated and that worked for CAL FIRE during some of our bigger blazes. It's just a conversation that needs to keep happening, and it's not a conversation that's brought up that often at the higher levels of the legislature. So, I encourage people who are really concerned about climate change and the effects as it relates to employment, labor, COVID, insurance premiums, that they all rally around some of these issues and probably help to create more legislation in the following years to come.
Yeah, so right now, I described how there's an outdoor air standard that the United Farm Workers worked on to protect agricultural workers. There is none for indoor workers. And when you think about the mega warehouses in Riverside, San Bernardino County, going up into Kern County, these Goliath buildings that don't have AC in it, and that people who are pickers or sorters are doing this work all day long. And if they're not like next to a fan, they're suffering, and it's affecting their health. So our organization is trying to push Cal OSHA to finally implement a law where they were tasked with coming up with an indoor air standard. I don't think that the Amazons of this world are going to appreciate the fact that there's this little organization in LA that's saying, hey, you have to look out for the workers' health in these mega warehouses. So that's something we want to take on. And I think it's important. And, protecting people's health, I think, is where you can connect on that climate issue, where it's super important. So there's that. We have a bill that we're working with Assembly Member Luz Rivas, and she just introduced it. It's AB 585, and it suggests in its language that the administration needs to do a coordinated, integrated approach on extreme heat. As it is right now, it's all over the place. So the California Energy Commission is in charge of buildings with insulation and with cool roofs and trying to get air conditioners to perform better. So that's the Energy Commission. And then over here is the California Public Utilities Commission. The Cal ISO is trying to keep the grid going on extremely hot days, but it doesn't always work. The grid goes down and people go without power. We're seeing that in Texas right now.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have the Public Health Department. and they're supposed to make sure that people don't die when it's extremely hot. And then there's like the Caltrans that's supposed to be in charge of cool streets, et cetera, and let alone the Natural Resources Agency and the role of trees and CAL FIRE that does trees. So there's so much that can be done on heat if we just work together. And so that's what this bill is about, AB 585. Our organization is also doing some work in the Baldwin Hills. Got hired by the Baldwin Hills Conservancy, great organization, to come up with a resilience plan. How can the parks lands help the people in Baldwin Hills area, Ladera Heights, other places to become more resilient in the face of whatever it might be, earthquake, extremely hot days when there's nothing but wildfire smoke. We all remember this in California. We had 7 weeks of smoky skies in LA. 7 weeks straight. And imagine all that particulate matter and what that was doing to our health. So we're going to help develop this project for Baldwin Hills. We're thinking of these things called resilience hubs. It's sort of like a cooling center, but on steroids. We're also part of this statewide effort sponsored by the Strategic Growth Council called Partners Advancing Climate Equity, where it's a training program for a couple dozen people across the state to really understand climate change and how to be effective on it. We're also helping LA County with their climate vulnerability assessment to go deeper on how LA County is being impacted by climate change. And that report should influence a lot of decisions going forward whenever it has to do with spending money in LA region. And last but not least, I'm really proud of a program that we're doing with another nonprofit. They're called Grid Alternatives, and they train kids from the inner city on how to install solar. One of the things they've noticed, though, is that a lot of the roofs are so bad that they can't put the photovoltaic panels on. And so Climate Resolve has found funding to go and fix those roofs on those low-income homeowners' roofs, and then they can put the solar on top of them. So we have this kind of really nice relationship, and Climate Resolve was the group that lobbied for cool roofs in LA City and LA County, and we now have the most aggressive standards for cool roofs anywhere in the United States, and we're kind of a trendsetter in that area. So those are just a few of the things that we're working on. We're working on a lot more than that. Every now and then we even sue the government when they do the wrong thing, known to do that. Yeah.
I love all of your initiatives. I mean, everything you guys are doing is remarkable and mind-blowing. I mean, just to go back to the Amazon workers and warehouses. So this would be on Amazon. So if you're going to report your ESG or environmental social governance, qualifications and metrics, and you're not air conditioning or cooling down those warehouses, you don't get to file that you are doing the right thing. Because that's the whole thing with ESG. You can't just pick and choose little things to do. It's a whole encompassing program there.
Well, I'd love to work with you on that, Wendy. So let's be in touch. We need to work on this stuff together.
I love this stuff. And I will let Joy close us out, but thank you. We've actually gone a little bit over, so I hope, thank you for your time. I know you've been back-to-back meetings all day. Joy, I'll let you close it out. Go.
Jonathan, just thank you. Thank you for everything that you do in the community, in my hood as well. I live in Ladera Heights, Baldwin Hills Conservancy, so I know what's going on with all of the oil fields and everything else, and you're just a great human being, trying, like Wendy and I are, to make this place a better planet. So, with that, what can I say? Another great show under the belt, and I'll see you guys soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John.
Bye, Wendy. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great day, guys.